So I have a fun presentation, but I only have 25 minutes to go through it, and I'm going to just start racing and talking at a New York speed. So I hope you can put up with that. So what is putting the flesh on the bones? A lot of people spend time looking for names, dates, and places to flesh out their family tree and collect as many ancestors and relatives as possible, and that's good. That's what is expected. But I have a different approach for doing genealogy, and I've sort of come into it without even choosing to do so. But I consider putting the flesh on the bones as concentrating on one individual at a time, and I think you can go beyond the questions who, when, and where. I think you can actually explore the far more interesting questions, why and how. Why did our ancestors act the way they did? And maybe even more important than that, how did they have an impact on you and me? So I got started a long time ago, way before the internet, and using microfilms and a lot of elbow grease, I found this Soundex index card from the 1920 US Census. It shows my great-grandfather Isaac Spier, and it shows that he was born in New York. This is not true, but that's what the census taker wrote down. It shows my great-grandmother Ida, my grandfather Sidney, who I knew quite well, and his brother and sister Lillian and David. But the most important thing on this index card is the fact that he was born in New York. The next record I found was the birth certificate for my grandfather Sidney. According to this document, his father, Isaac Spier, was born not in New York, but in Hanley, Staffordshire, England. So right off the bat, I was a little bit confused because I had a great-grandfather who was born in two different locations. The most important data point on this document is the date of birth of my grandfather, which is May 30th, 1895. Hold that date in your mind for just a minute because I'm going to do some calendar calculations. And it also has my great-grandfather's signature. My mother was enamored with her grandfather and his handwriting skills, and as a result, she took up calligraphy. This is the marriage certificate for my great-grandparents. It shows my great-grandfather Isaac Spier living at 267 20th Street in Brooklyn. And according to this, well, we'll get back to that in a second, it shows my great-grandmother Ida also living at 267 20th Street in Brooklyn. According to this document, my great-grandfather was born not in New York, not in Hanley, Staffordshire, England, but in London, England, which might be the right answer. What's a little bit more difficult to see on this document is the day of the wedding, which is right here. It's the 18th of November, 1894. And if you count the number of months between November and May of 1895, that is 6 months. It's possible that my grandfather Sidney was a preemie baby, but odds are, given what I'm going to tell you, something else was cooking, literally and figuratively. So I went looking elsewhere. This is the Soundex index card from the 1900 US Federal Census showing one Isaac Spier having been born in Pennsylvania, a fourth location. And this guy was enumerated as an inmate at Sing Sing prison. I thought, no, this can't be my family. I was raised a goody two-shoes here in New York. I went and did all the right things. I went to the right schools. How could I possibly descend from a Sing Sing inmate? But other things got even stranger. This is the death certificate for my great-grandmother Ida. It shows that her husband's name was not Isaac, but Joseph. So I tried to make sense of all this. I built a spreadsheet, and I had lots of documents with the name Isaac Spier, lots of documents with the name Joseph Spier. And the birth years were different, but they're all in the same range. 4 different birth locations: London, Hanley, Staffordshire, England, Pennsylvania, and New York, various addresses, and his occupations. The calling. I remember the story from my childhood. I went to my grandparents' house in Brooklyn one day, and for reasons I can't remember, I teased my grandmother that should I be a bad boy that day, she'd have to lock me up in Sing Sing. And she pulled me aside and very stern words said, "Don't you dare use the words Sing Sing in front of your grandfather. That will really annoy him." So I thought about that like, wow, maybe there's a reason why Grandma said that. I also truly heard an internal voice that either said, go to New York or come to New York. There's something you have to look at. So I contacted Sing Sing Prison. They told me they did not have any historical records, but they suggested I contact the New York State Archives in Albany. I called up Albany. Do you have the records? They said, yes, we do. I said, can you look up something for me? They said, well, when was he admitted? I said, I don't know, but it has to be somewhere between 1895, when my grandfather Sidney was born, and 1900, when the guy was listed in the census as being an inmate behind bars at Sing Sing. They said, we can't do that. That's too much work, but we have the record books here. Come to Albany. We'll let you look at it. In 1 hour, I found this record, and it is a doozy. It has Isaac Spier, alias Herbert Edward Spier, a third name. It's a great record. It shows on September 27, 1897, he was convicted on charges of bigamy. And I knew this was my guy because it lists his nearest relative, one Ida Spier, living at 267 20th Street in Brooklyn, the same address I showed you on the marriage certificate. It's got a lot of information, according to this. He was born in England. He was 23 years of age. He was an entry clerk as well as a trolley car conductor. That's how he could get crosstown between the two wives so easily. He knew the trolley car system really well. He was temperate. He did not use tobacco. He lists himself as a Protestant, but no, he was Jewish. So why did he do that? I don't know. But this sort of rocked my world. So I called my brother. We had a good laugh. I called my aunt. She was horrified by the news. She did not know this. My mother clearly knew this, but my mother was 11 years older than my aunt. This sort of rocked my aunt's world, rocked my world. So my brother suggests I contact the Kings County Courthouse, and not only did I get the Kings County clerk's notebook, but the guy there told me I should contact the New York City Municipal Archives, where undoubtedly I would find the court case. So here's a court case, the state of New York versus Isaac Spier, alias Herbert Edward Spier, alias the great-grandfather of Ron Arons, your speaker today. It didn't say that. So my great-grandfather was put on the stand, and in no uncertain terms, he was asked whether he married the woman in the red dress by a Rabbi Ettinger. So right down here it says, were you married by Rabbi Ettinger? And my great-grandfather said, I can't recollect. I don't remember marrying that woman in that red dress. There was a letter in that same file, and I have to read this to you. It's great. So from behind bars at the Raymond Street Jail, my great-grandfather wrote to Ida, and he said, please call me and see me as I wish to talk to you. I am so miserable, and you have made me so. It's obviously her fault that he's behind bars. Don't forget to come and see me, blah, 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 blah. I lost my job on the cars, and I was only working for a little bit, and continues on. I wish you would come down and, as soon as possible. Your uncle couldn't help you get a pass. Do as I ask you, and forgive me if I have done anything wrong. He was never guilty of anything. In that same case file was the marriage certificate to the other woman. Her name was Minnie Ott. I would find many newspaper articles about my great-grandfather and his antics. The title of this from the Brooklyn Citizen is Spier's Many Wives, 2 were in court, and there are others, the police say. Son of a well-known rabbi. Spier is 24 years old, and if reports about him are true, he has at least 4 wives. Now, this is a really great article because I have yet to find a photograph of my great-grandfather, but this gets me as close as I can. Let me read to you this last paragraph. There, the 2 wives met, and one of the most dramatic incidents which ever took place in that police station was enacted. Spier repudiated his lawful wife. He declared he had never seen her before. He wilted when his father-in-law held up Spier's 2-year-old boy, my grandfather Sidney, who is an exact image of the prisoner. Now, I have to tell you, I remember what my grandfather Sidney looked like, so by extension, I have some understanding of what my great-grandfather looked like. This is really powerful stuff. So Minnie Ott has meaning. Several other things played themselves out at my grandparents' house in Brooklyn over and over again. If my grandmother did some stupid things, and she did stupid things all the time, my grandfather would needle her, would yell out, Mina, Mina, and she would get very angry, and he would chuckle under his breath. And I have to believe that this was a private joke, and basically my grandfather was telling Grandma, if you don't get your act together, Grandma, there's a woman out there named Mina I'm going to fool around with. So this is, I've been joking for years that this is extended psychotherapy. This is something my therapist in Berkeley, California cannot help me with. I have to do the work. But this is really powerful at explaining events of my childhood, even though my great-grandfather died 9 years before I was born. So, way before the internet, I walked around the New York Public Library and I found the New York Times Personal Name Index, and I found this article from 1925. My great-grandfather, a convicted felon, somehow got a job as a New York State income tax auditor. And he was working on a case, and he was accused of attempted extortion with another guy named Louis Loeffler. So, New York Times headlines. I contacted the New York City Municipal Archives again, and this was a doozy of a file. It was about 100 pages long, including this document, which is an affidavit signed by my great-grandfather under the name of Joseph Spier, saying, of course, he didn't do anything wrong. He never did anything wrong. In that same file was this piece of paper from the New York City Police Department, and according to this, my great-grandfather was arrested on charges of forgery. I went and got a newspaper article. My great-grandfather was working for the musical instruments company called Gretsch. Anyone ever hear of Gretsch? They make high-end guitars and drums used by the best musicians you can name. Anyway, my great-grandfather was in the finance department and cooking the books to the tune of about $5,000, which is a lot of money in 1916. This is my great-grandfather's death certificate. It shows that his last wife was a woman by the name of Rose. He's buried in Mount Hebron Cemetery right here in Queens. Here is a photograph someone took for me years ago. Here we have Rose, the last wife, buried right next to my great-grandfather. And this is a really curious tombstone because it has my great-grandfather's name in English, Joseph N. Spier. But if you can read Hebrew, if you can't, I'll tell you what it says. It says Isaac Nathan, son of Abraham, above in Hebrew. So here's one lasting tribute that my great-grandfather went by at least 2 different names. I've shown you 3 different names, 4 different birth locations. This is not easy research. So the engineer in me wanted to find out where he was born. So I checked a lot of records, the 1881 British Census, passenger ship records, U.S. immigration and naturalization records. Never found out where he was born. I checked the New York City Birth Index multiple times, never found anything. I checked the English Civil Registration Index, never found anything. I don't know if there ever was a birth registration or a birth certificate for him. The Rosetta Stone. Years ago, I went to Salt Lake City, and just that year, the LDS Library put the 1881 British Census on a CD-ROM database. I typed in Isaac Spier, and I hit pay dirt. And here is my family living in Brighton, England. Here we have Isaac Spier, born in London. His father, Abraham Spier, was a rabbi. He was a rabbi throughout England. So, anyone know anything about Brighton, England? This is the Royal Pavilion. Anyone know why it was built? It was built by the Prince of England as his summer retreat, also a place where he took his mistress. So this was a clue. I bet my great-grandfather thought if it's good enough for the Prince of England to fool around, it was good enough for him to fool around. And in fact, the New York Times had an article 4 years ago about bigamy in England and how it went on the rise at the end of the 19th century. So the trail went cold, and I went looking for Isaac's siblings. So his older sister, Rebecca, got married in Plymouth. And who was the officiator? None other than my great-great-grandfather, A.N. Spier, the rabbi. Here is the family in the 1891 census living in Plymouth. Here is an antiquarian map of Plymouth. Here's the synagogue in Plymouth, and here is the living quarters. And I actually had the opportunity to see both the stained glass windows in this beautiful synagogue in Plymouth, as well as the living quarters where my family lived more than 100 years ago. Now, there was an author, a rabbi, who wrote about Jewish people living in the Plymouth community, and he wrote that the chief rabbi wrote in peremptory terms to Rabbi Spiers in Plymouth because Rabbi Spiers buried the child too soon after death. And the chief rabbi in London said it's highly necessary to prevent this from happening again because it may lead to grave scandal or danger. So my great-grandfather also got into trouble. So let's see, the trail went cold, so I went looking for the next sibling, Julia. She got married in Sheffield. The family moved around. Who was the officiator at that wedding? None other than my great-great-grandfather, Abraham Spier. Here's the 1901 census showing that my family moved to Manchester. They're moving all around England. And here is the death certificate for Abraham the rabbi. And a little disturbing here, this shows that he hung himself. I thought he was upset because my great-grandfather Isaac was behind bars at Sing Sing, but no, something else was happening. In fact, he had a dental condition, and in discussing this with my dentist, he said he probably had something called a periodontal abscess, which is an infection, and in those days, in 1910, they did not have antibiotics, and he would have had no choice but to take himself out. So a friend of mine suggests I contact a Jewish newspaper in Manchester, England, and I got top billing, and they said this crazy guy from California is looking for his family here in England, looking for the name Spier or Spiers. And a cousin contacted me from London. She said, oh, well, I descend from that guy too, and furthermore, there are cousins in New York, a guy named Harvey. So an hour later, I was on the phone with Harvey. I said, Harvey, what do you know? He said, well, I'm related, and furthermore, I have pictures of your great-grandfather. Here's Abraham the rabbi and his wife Bessie. Here are the naturalization papers for Abraham the rabbi. Here is the marriage certificate from 1848 from Northeast Poland for Abraham's parents, and the brothers, the cousin in New York told me that the name wasn't even Spier, it was Shishupski, a completely bizarre name. So to make a long story short, it was a case of like father, like son. Both Abraham and Isaac were the oldest male child. They both had a handful of siblings. They both left their country of birth. They both got married for the first time at age 20. Both loved weddings. My great-great-grandfather, Abraham the rabbi, was a participant in one and officiator at more than 30 other weddings. And Isaac was married at least 3 times. Both changed their names. Both got into trouble. Both, strangely enough, lived either in or near a prison. And both had, I think, troubled relationships with their children. So this is actually wrong. It's 4, and I'm going to get to that in a second. So putting the flesh on the bones is looking at a target individual, looking at the parents or siblings, other relatives, children, events, and locations. There is value in collecting as much information about a person as you can. The more you collect, the more there's a multiplier in effect, and the more powerful this becomes. So I collected a lot of documents. This is a spreadsheet of documents I found about Isaac. I did the same thing for Abraham. And now, even though I was concentrating on Isaac, now I have cousins that I found. Now I'm getting invited to weddings and bar mitzvahs everywhere, and I don't even know what I'm being invited to. So this is a really expensive hobby. And if you don't understand it, don't get involved in this because it gets really, really exponentially expensive. So the story continues. So this is a World War II draft registration showing more specificity as to where in Pennsylvania my great-grandfather definitely was not born. He's listed Scranton. Not Scranton, I proved to you London. So recently I found this newspaper article from Buffalo. There was a Joseph N. Spier. There are not too many Joseph N. Spiers in Brooklyn, marrying a woman by the name of Anna Meredith. And here is the marriage certificate from Buffalo. One Joseph N. Spier from Brooklyn marrying an Anna Meredith. And it says he was an auditor, okay, and he was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania. So he was even consistent in his lies. This has to be him. Who else could it be? So, and strangely enough, Isaac is listed in the 1925 state census twice. Once with my great-grandmother, Ida, once with his third wife, Anna. So now I'm analyzing his signatures. That's another analysis I'm going for. And I've now concluded that there were not one, but 5 men named Isaac Spier, all born in a 12-year time frame, all of whom lived where my great-grandfather lived or claimed to live. All 5 got into trouble. 4 of the 5 had extramarital affairs. What are the odds of that? It's impossible. It's impossible, but I proved it all true. So recommendations, stop and smell the roses, research individuals one at a time. There's a ton of information out there. Persistence pays off. Truly, expect the unexpected, and you're limited only by imagination. I'll say good luck, and I'll take questions. I do have some books for sale. Questions? In the back. Where did I get it? I sent off, that's a great question. I sent off to Buffalo multiple different ways. I sent 4 different ways, express, slow, because I really wanted it quickly, but I ultimately got a couple different things. But I sent off to Buffalo, the city clerk, and other places as well. Other questions? Yes?
How would you compare using going to where the actual documents are versus using the computer? Do you find any difference?
There are definitely records that you cannot get online. You have to understand that. So especially like prison records. Ancestry actually has put some of the Sing Sing records online, but in the main, you have to go to the New York State Archives. So you look at other prison records. There's a lot offline. You have to understand that if you want to do truly great research, you have to go offline. Yes?
Have you tried doing looking at the records of the actual court cases?
So I showed the court case for the Bigamy trial.
How'd you find that?
I contacted the New York City Municipal Archives. I also showed the affidavit from the extortion case filed. I also got that at the New York City Municipal Archives. Other questions? Yes?
My great-grandfather lived on 20th Street at the same time.
Maybe they were friends. Maybe we have to talk. I'll give you my card. We can talk. Maybe there was some hanky-panky there that I don't even know about. Go ahead.
So do you know that he was actually born in London? What is your conclusion?
My conclusion is that he was born in London because the census is the best record I found. I have no, that seems to make the most sense. I have no reason to believe he was born elsewhere. Other questions? Going once, twice. Yes?
Check synagogues?
Did I check synagogues for births?
The birth or even the marriage record?
Yeah, unfortunately, not all the birth records for the synagogues in London survive, so I've looked, but I haven't found anything.
Do you have that one where it's the 6 months?
Well, clearly he was born in England because he's in the 1851 census, so, the 1881 census. Clearly he was born in England, but so looking in New York is futile. He was born in England. I just don't know exactly.
I have the ketubah of one family member, but then it shows up in the New York City records that they got married 3 months later.
Okay, so you have some.
There's the rabbi's marriage, and then there's the civil marriage.
Yeah, I've looked. Believe me, I've looked, but I've yet to find anything. So the parents were married in Poland, I believe, because they had a daughter, Rebecca, before they came to England. Yes?
Did your grandmother know about this whole thing? Were you able to talk to her about it eventually? Or?
Did my grandmother know? My grandfather was the son of my great-grandfather. So did he know? Sure he knew. Did I talk to him? I had no understanding of this until after my mother passed away. And my mother told me or asked me when I went to Europe for the first time when I was in college to look for his marriage record, his birth record, and I never found it then. I've never found it since. So my mother knew about it. My grandfather had to know about it. My aunt, surprisingly, did not know about it. She was surprised when I told her. Yes?
Did they continue in the Jewish tradition, or did they get married with Christians?
So did they continue in the Jewish tradition? So my whole family is Jewish. There's been no marrying out of the faith, so we've continued in the Jewish tradition. I guess this is a short answer. Other questions? Got 1 more minute. I know this. How are you, Chuck? In the back, any questions? Going once, twice, 3 times the lady. Okay, thanks a lot.
Ron Arons, ladies and gentlemen, nice job. Thank you, Ron. And, you know, we all have these black sheep. I'm not so sure they're quite as challenging as that one was, but great presentation. We're going to have Gilad Yafet from MyHeritage, the founder, coming up here at 1 o'clock. So take a break, go get some food, and get right back here. We'd love to see you.